Before we begin with the highlight of this evening, which is a conversation that I get to have with President Herzog, let me take a moment to extend a special greeting to First Lady Michal Herzog. Michal.
She damn well deserves it. Absolutely.
Look, friends, many of you have been at these evenings before. These are normally unvarnished celebrations. We celebrate the honoree. We celebrate his or her achievements. We celebrate their contributions to peace and security. We celebrate. Tonight, I think it's fair to say, it's a different evening.
Absolutely.
Yes, we are here to recognize, honor, and acknowledge the unifying leadership of our honoree. But we cannot all be together without recognizing even more broadly that this is not an evening for celebration when millions of Israelis are expelled from their homes, when many are facing rockets from the north and the south, and when, as Shelley said in her opening remarks, far too many, more than just one, are still in the hell of Gaza. So tonight is a commemoration, an acknowledgement, a recognition, but not a celebration. And still, I am so delighted on behalf of the Washington Institute that you, Mr. President, would fly all the way to be with us on this very special evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we start, I also want, first of all, to acknowledge the presence of our excellent ambassador to the United Nations, my dear friend Danny Danone and his wife Tali. And I want to thank you, Rob. You're doing a terrific job. I know you for many years, but this is pretty awesome, pretty impressive group. And I respect the Institute tremendously. My first appearance with the Institute was back in 2005. And I've been ever since in good contacts with you and the team and Dennis and all. And as you know, my brother Mike's relationship with you. So I'm honored, we're very honored, Michal and I, to be here. And correctly you stated, we're not celebrating. We are in a very, very challenging period in our lives. And I want to express my heartfelt condolences to the Weinstein family. Their story is told again and again in our country. A couple that went out to hike, in the morning hike, a beautiful couple. And as part of the terrible massacre, we lost them as well. We hope they'll be back. Please.
Thank you. All right, so as those of you who have been at these events know, we don't ask our honorees to make addresses. We force them to sit through a question and answer discussion, and that's what we're going to do tonight, even with the sitting president of the State of Israel. So let's begin. Mr. President, look, this has been a horrible year, the longest war in our memory for the State of Israel, a war on multiple fronts, a war that appears to be expanding and deepening in intensity. So, given your unique vantage point, can you give us your snapshot analysis of where you think Israel is in the war?
So let's first think where we were on the 6th of October. On the 6th of October, at noontime, that was the eve of what we call Simchat Torah, I was attending the last ceremony commemorating the Yom Kippur, the 1973 war. It was 50 years to the war that we thought was the last war of the Middle East, the last big war of the Middle East. In those days, in 1973, Israel failed to identify the possibility of war, and it is something that you study and talk about time and again. And I came back home. I said to Michal, it was the brigade that fought fiercely to cross the Suez Canal, went into Egypt, and actually brought the victory or the agreement that led to the peace agreement with Egypt. And I came back and I said to Michal, these guys, some of them with their great-grandchildren, some of them in wheelchairs, you know, if you look at them, you know, we are unbeatable. And we woke up the next morning with terrible sirens that changed our lives. And ever since, we are in a historic phase in our national being and the region. And we have to understand it. These are not events and processes that end quickly. It's a call to analyze all paradigms and understand where we are at. It is a war with multiple frontiers, with an enemy which operates all throughout the region, with proxies, an empire of evil, and we have to understand it. We clearly understand that we are fighting the war for the free world. A lot of people in the free world don't necessarily understand or comprehend it. But because of that, we are paying a very heavy price. But as a nation, we are showing immense resilience and strength. We need our allies with us so that we can change and tilt the balance and the direction of history in a different direction that is so much needed in our region. Fact of the matter is very clear. We tried all sorts of alternatives to get to peace, and we were hit with the most barbaric attack imaginable, where our people, our citizens on an internationally recognized boundary, living in a beautiful paradise of their own, with lifestyles and belief of a multitude that only Israel can create, were butchered, burned, raped, abducted, beheaded, and taken hostage. We have to realize it. This is something that resonates now very deep in the nation, and our nation mobilized again without even comprehending what happened to us overnight. But we had 350,000 Israelis leave everything and go and serve in the army from there, you know, all the way up to the age 96. You don't see this anywhere. And now they're repeating again and again. And they're all over in all frontiers and in Lebanon. So this is something that we still have to comprehend. We are in the trauma, not all necessarily in the post-trauma, but we have to comprehend. And therefore, we are eager, like all decent human beings, to end this war. We did not seek this war. We did not ask for this war. God forbid, this war was imposed upon us. But once it was imposed upon us, we have to make clear that history changes its course. We cannot repeat the same rounds again and again every few years. It doesn't go this way. And we cannot tolerate terror. And that is why we're fighting so hard, and it's difficult and painful, and it creates international crisis. But I hope that with the great achievements of our security forces and the IDF, with their valor and bravery, with good decisions, we can exit from the war in offering the region a different alternative.
So let me ask you about, yes. Let me ask you specifically about one aspect of the war, and that is Iran. Now, after 40 years of fighting in the shadows with Iran, Israel and Iran are now hitting each other directly. there is no other word for this than war. When one side lobs hundreds and hundreds of rockets, missiles, and drones at the other side, that's war. What will it take to win this fight? What will winning against Iran, hundreds of kilometers away from your border, what will winning require, and what will it look like?
I'm very cautious in making bombastic declarations. At the end of it, you know, we dissect it not only to the big picture, but also to the various frontiers. I sincerely hope that we will advance on the Israel-Lebanese border with a robust resolution and agreement that will give safety and security for our citizens and our nation. This has been worked upon by the administration with the good services of Amos Hochstein. We are speaking about the day after with a few partners in Gaza, and I think that's another issue that is being discussed right these very days with the administration. And the grand picture of Iran is a grand issue. It's a major issue that needs to be dealt with not only by Israel, but by the world powers that must comprehend that this ideology will undermine and destroy the free world. And they must comprehend that Iran, a nuclear Iran, is a threat to the entire universe. And they should understand and comprehend that the most radicalized element in the entire region that wants to radicalize the region and make it unstable and drive the world crazy with terror cells all over the world starts and ends with Iran. Think about it for a moment. For years and years we've been talking about it, but at the end you need, and I do agree with Teddy Roosevelt, you need to speak softly and carry a big stick. I mean, rather than speaking with all sorts of messages we need to do, the world needs to do. Think about the fact that, you know, Hezbollah is one of the most, or was one of the most armed armies in the world. And they have terror cells all over the world parallel to the terror cells of Iran. Think about the fact that a small tribe in Yemen, the Houthis, 50,000 people in all, have armaments of an empire. They have cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. Ballistic missiles, you know, who has ballistic missiles? And that impacts international trade and cost of living of every person in the world. So it's not only an issue for Israel. It is an ideological battle that must be won against the empire of evil. And this is our demand, and this is our call. We've been saying it for years. And of course, we know the international game and all, we understand. But I think now there is a clear opportunity to gather forces together and make a change. I wouldn't want to discuss in depth what it means, but I want to say a message actually from here, from this wonderful event, to the people of Iran. Because there's a difference between the people and the regime. The regime calls for the destruction of the state of Israel and is acting as a rogue regime throughout the world. But the people of Iran carry a legacy and a history, an incredible history and tradition, and they deserve so much better, and they actually should rise up against the regime and fight for change. And I hope they'll do that.
In case you haven't heard, we had an election here in the United States. You mentioned a moment ago that the free world needs to stand up. So let me ask you about a certain aspect of our elections. Now, Israel is still held largely in bipartisan terms here in the United States.
I enjoyed it when I spoke in Congress, as you saw. Yeah.
Absolutely. Although I think it's also fair to say that we've seen many express doubts and criticisms about the U.S.-Israel relationship in recent times. And that's putting it mildly. So my question is, what responsibility do you think Israel has to address those questions or doubts that some Americans are beginning to have about this relationship?
Let's first look in a historical perspective about this relationship, because it is a unique relationship which really stems from the origins of our societies, which is based on the values of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the values of democracy, which were laid down actually originally in our scriptures. And I would say, since my family's history has connected with all of the last 14 or 15 presidents of the United States of America, I know I have a certain historical perspective. We should understand that because we live in an era where everything is on the web, everything is digitized, so what people say in Israel or what people say in the United States resonates immediately and can create a flare and a blast. And there's, of course, a lot of sensitivity and political sensitivity, especially in eras of elections and decision makings, and the press and all. That's really what democracies are all about. Because you have partners who are not democratic. The United States has partners who are not democratic, and therefore you can't hear or say anything according to the instructions of the government or the ruler. Here in Israel, people have different opinions on so many things, but we do bear immense responsibility in how we react and behave overall on these relations. We've gone through a complicated and challenging year, but think about it. The moment this attack, this terrible massacre took place, within days, the President of the United States of America landed in Israel and comforted and strengthened the Israeli people. So we're very grateful to President Biden. And I will be meeting with President Biden on Tuesday in the Oval Office to express immense gratitude for what he has done. I had the pleasure of speaking with President-elect Donald Trump on Thursday, and it was a very warm and kind conversation. And our primary focus in the conversation had to do with the key to the knob of getting the new direction in the Middle East, which is, of course, the high moral ground of bringing all the hostages back home. This was the focus of the conversation. And if already we are mentioning it, truly it is something so deep and so important, so painful and so agonizing that we must do whatever it takes to bring them home.
Look, among Israelis, you have a terrific understanding of America. You lived here. As a young man, you lived here in New York City. You attended Ramaz School. You would,
Yeah.
So there you go.
All the graduates here, yeah.
You were at Cornell, at NYU. You went to camp at Ramah. Now, I'm saying all this as a prelude to this. Over the last year, you've seen how so many young people in America reacted to the images of Gaza on college campuses here. What do you think so many kids were missing? Why do you think they missed the story so badly?
One has to understand that, as I've said, in the modern day and age of delivering message and content, we all understand that there are platforms which are very easily affecting your innermost knowledge and understanding of things, mostly through images, and these are painful images. You saw a quote of mine, how much, I truly take pain in the suffering of others and the suffering of our neighbors. But as I've said, when one has the right to defend itself or herself, it's as difficult to explain to us, a young American who has a totally different perception of life, what it means to defend oneself, what it means to send your family relative, your son, your husband, your daughter, your wife to the front, to the battlefront, to defend your home, your people. And how much caution we take in trying to adhere to the most basic needs of international humanitarian law. But how do you digest it quickly and transfer the message to somebody who really doesn't understand the conflict? Truly, as said many times, I remember David Makovsky saying, they don't know what the sea is and what the river is. And therefore, it's a perception of life. When you speak about pursuit of happiness or the great values of the American society, it is simply a different wavelength than what a young Israeli goes through in these very days. And it's not easy for anyone in our country, but we realize that it is our call of duty. We have the most fantastic young generation that any nation can see. We are very proud of them, what they are doing, the way they mobilize, the way they're going to the front lines. And it is difficult to explain it to somebody else on campus who's been brainwashed by a machine that has been doing this for years and years and years. And not understanding, not only that, it's not understanding the basic security interests of the United States of America. If you are the biggest empire or the most influential nation on earth, you have a certain role to play in humanity. You can't just close yourself in because you both benefit from your capabilities and strength, and you also have national interests that need to be protected. If we are the closest ally of the United States of America and vice versa, we have to have a dialogue, and we are trying our best to protect us, but we're also fighting the war of the entire Western civilization. We should understand that. And it is difficult to explain it to young children or young kids in school when the teacher goes in and says, on the map in some of your boards of educations around the United States that, take off Israel, it's not really relevant, or questions about what it means. And I think this is a huge challenge in the discourse in the United States of America.
All right, let's shift gears. You spent a lot of time over the last year traveling the globe, speaking to world leaders to make Israel's case. Sometimes it's an uphill battle. But I want to ask you, was there one leader who stood out, who surprised you in a positive sense? Someone who you didn't expect, but who understood you and got you and was more supportive of Israel than you expected?
So, of course, I won't point out one because it's unfair. I've been talking to hundreds of leaders. Almost every day I talk to a world leader or correspond. Of course, my main objective is the issue of the hostages. And when you had 36 nationalities represented within the hostages and the casualties, in addition to that, you speak to many leaders and you speak all over the world. And I have the interesting experience of understanding the difference between what people say outside and what they really believe. I find also faith as a very big tool in world affairs. It's also very, very interesting to speak because I come from a family which has dealt, and is part of the Jewish faith in various ways, and it's something to discuss with people who love the Bible, for example. But I can say that, as I mentioned before, we were extremely grateful, and I can remember, families in Israel seeing President Biden's speech, the Don't speech, and then coming to Israel. There were many other leaders who came immediately, came throughout. You saw pictures here with Javier Milei and others. There are countries, for example, I intend to be next week in Azerbaijan, in Baku, in the climate conference. That's a Shiite country with a leader who was kept very strong to his word of strong and good connections and contacts with the state of Israel. I mean, there are many countries which intervened and did good throughout the war, and there are others who disappointed. That's a lesson because we know that interest game is an interest game. We can mention Eden Golan. Why can we mention Eden Golan? Because one of the challenges that I had as president was, how do we make sure that Israel's on the world stage with no ifs and buts in a time where everybody wants publicly, okay, with million bots on TikTok to get us out of here. So let's take the example of that Eurovision Song Contest. That song contest is watched by billions of human beings around the world. You want Israel to be proudly represented on that stage. And yet, there were huge efforts, protests, threats, and undercurrents to get us off the list and not to come. It was in Malmö, Sweden, where there is a large population which opposes Israel vehemently there. And Eden went through a very difficult challenge in her appearance. But I, your humble servant, had to do a lot with the fact that she was there, including arguing on every word of her song to make sure that she's not canceled by some political dirty game which also was looming above. So what I'm saying is, you have many friends and people with moral clarity who stood up with us and said, Israel is in the race, in the game. Israel should play in Amsterdam, and Israel should play in France, and Israel should be everywhere.
So that's a perfect lead-in for me to remind everyone, tonight, November 10th, is a very special date, a date that's important in the history of Israel, and a date that's important in the history of the Herzog family. Because it's 49 years ago tonight that your father stood at the rostrum of the United Nations and did what we're about to see in this video that we're going to show you right now.
For us, the Jewish people, this resolution based on hatred, falsehood and arrogance is devoid of any moral or legal value. For us, the Jewish people, this is no more than a piece of paper, and we shall treat it as such. Thank you, Mr. President.
So Daniel Patrick Moynihan there.
Yes. So for those of you who are too young to know what we just saw, that was then UN Ambassador Chaim Herzog, who ripped up in 1975 the Zionism is Racism resolution from the rostrum of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Now, it's 49 years later, and there are voices in the UN accusing Israel, the country born out of genocide, of committing genocide. How do you explain 49 years later? Are there 175 anti-Semitic countries at Turtle Bay? What is going on in the world that was then and it's still here now?
So just first let's speak about that historic event. It was a huge moment and a wake-up call for the global community, and especially the Jewish global community. This was a resolution that was going through the United Nations with a clear anti-Semitic choreography for about 10 years. And finally it got to the rostrum. It was then you had a big Eastern Bloc led by the USSR, and you had countries pushing this resolution, Arab countries, and it came to the floor, and there was a lot of debate, and my father was told by a friend of his that November 10th will be 37 years in those days to Kristallnacht, to the night of the crystals, which was basically the launching pad for the Holocaust. So my father opened the speech by mentioning that, and that is what we are marking today, is 86 years to Kristallnacht. And what does it mean, basically? That when we say in the Haggadah, in each generation, there are those who are out there to get rid of us and kill us, there is something basically true in it, and we should always understand it, not take things for granted, understand that we have to work together. The message that I'm resonating to the people of Israel all the time is absolutely, you can debate, you can argue, you can do whatever you want and say whatever you want. This is a democracy and this is part of our DNA. But there's a way how to argue. Don't rip apart the only Jewish nation state in the world. And I say to our friends from all over the world, and I say to our brothers and sisters in the Jewish world, don't be ostriches. Don't think that it'll go away. It won't go away. This is an ancient old phenomena and disease of catastrophes here and there. And as Harold Greenspan said so beautifully, you know, he remembers the Holocaust. We have here in the room a person who remembers 1939. So we cannot ignore that. We have to understand that therefore, with Israel's strong presence, incredible people, it must always be as strong as possible and must always be able to defend itself by itself. Now, it's not true to say that there are so many anti-Semitic countries, God forbid. And Danny Danon will tell you, he brought me to meet the members, the ambassadors to the United Nations, the Security Council from the various nation states. And with all their arguments, there are those who are in favor and those who are against. And there are also, unfortunately, anti-Semitic traits. We understand that fully. But we should learn from that resolution and that terrible moment in the face of the nations that this phenomena can recur, and it has recurred again in front of our eyes. I say to myself, I wonder if I ever believed I'll be seeing it again. But we are seeing it again. And therefore, we have to stand up strongly and fight back and not be afraid of anything. And I say to campus members, faculty, Jewish faculty who came swarming into the president's home from all over the United States, I say, unite together and fight back. And I say to every community, just to add a historical anecdote, that resolution was finally abolished in 1991 when under President Bush's father and his excellent ambassador, Tom Pickering, who led the abolishment and cancellation of that resolution. Imagine that. And he gave it to my father, who was then President of Israel, framed, and wrote, "Dear Mr. President, please don't tear this resolution."
And, you know, just to underscore how much the world in some ways has changed, just think about it. Today, a Jew is probably safer walking through the streets of Dubai than they are walking through the streets of Amsterdam.
It's a beautiful comment, and I have huge respect to the Emiratis for their leadership, for their bold vision towards the future of the region. They're Bahrainis, they're all the members, the Moroccans, the member states of the Abraham Accords and the nations who signed the peace. Let's not forget Egypt and Jordan, who are always there, who have changed the course of history of the Middle East and its trajectory. But we should, it was a very moving moment for me to land with Michal in a state visit in Abu Dhabi 2.5 years ago. And I must say that the cooperation, the friendship, and the huge potential is huge. And since I believe that there ought to be a frank and friendly and respected dialogue between Jew and Muslim, as the children of Abraham, I think that at the end, the trajectory that will prevail will be the trajectory of peace and inclusion of Israel in the region. That is why this is a historic moment where we have to fight in order to bring the day after. President Biden mentioned in the G20 summit just before the war a vision of the connectivity of Israel all the way to India as part of a grand strategic choreography of the world that has to go through Saudi Arabia and, of course, the Emirates and so forth. And I do believe, I adamantly believe, and I sincerely hope that we will be able to see change and hope and a new direction with the Saudis as well.
All right. So this brings me to my concluding question, because you're ending up on a hopeful future note. You mentioned in passing a moment ago the Passover Haggadah, and the final words of the Haggadah are, of course, next year in Jerusalem. I'm not going to ask you about what politics is going to be next year in Jerusalem. God forbid you should bring
Even if you ask, I won't answer.
Exactly. But put on your crystal ball and just tell us more broadly, a year from now, what will the situation look like? How different will it be a year from now than it is today?
I am hopeful. I would say, of course, that we have to remember if you're speaking about Israel, the national psyche and the national mood. Michal and I met over 1,000 families of bereaving Israelis this year, of all facets of life, all religions, all styles of life, all beliefs in the world, all types of faiths, incredible people, an incredible light within the society, and a lot of pain. And we meet daily with hostage families, with enormous agony and pain. And we meet many wounded soldiers and citizens with enormous agony and pain. And we meet many Israeli evacuees, tens of thousands whose life has been shattered and they cannot go back home. So there is a humongous task ahead of us. But I believe, as you could have seen, that we have also seen, as we went all throughout the region that was attacked in the terrible massacre, through each and every town, village, kibbutz, as of October 7th, a few weeks ago, for 3 days. And we saw rebuilding. And we saw people who lost their loved ones, and they are planting, and they are rebuilding, and they are starting again. And I feel, and I'm quite confident, that we shall see a better future within a year, that we will see many changes that will bring about hope and will bring about change, because it's necessary and it is required, and it's the right direction to bring us towards change in our life and inclusion in the region and bringing security and peace. And for that, unfortunately, we were called on duty because our enemy attacked us, and because it attacked us, we are able now to face it head on and remove its threats from our lives, at least in relative terms, so that we can offer for our people and our neighbors a better life. And I want to conclude by saying a word about Harold Greenspan, because my wife and I have been involved in Israeli civic society for years and years in huge amounts of good causes. One of them is a project that Harold Greenspan initiated, which is called PJ Library, which is a project that makes sure that young kids get books to read, real books, not iPhones, books, literature of high quality. But what moved us to our core was that in Israel, it is distributed in Hebrew and in Arabic for the Arabic children in Israel. And this is something that shows that people can live together and share life together in a democratic Jewish state of Israel. Thank you very much.